All rise.
Just CLE, isn't it?
Or,
Yeah. He's referred to it because I was an asshole.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Futrell.
May it please the Commission. Commissioners, I do not have any further questions for Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Futrell. Mr. Garris.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Roberts, I've got to just explain. My surname is Garris and I'm here for Crown Companies.
Thank you.
I have a few questions for you in relation to the infrastructure investment that was made by Crown during the term of your tenure. Now, in your statement, you referred to there being significant investments by Crown in property infrastructure to increase the company's business. Now, am I correct in assuming that one of those significant investments that you're referring to was the Crown Towers development?
Correct.
And were there any other major projects you had in mind when referring to those major property investments?
Yes, there was the, during my tenure as a director, there was the refurbishment of the Intercontinental, which subsequently became the Metropolitan Hotel. There was the smaller hotel, which I can't recall the name of. There was the expansion
Would that be the Promenade?
Promenade, thank you. There was the Riverside Room and the Pearl Room. There was the expansion or reconfiguration of the convention centre areas, and there was an expansion in regard to the gaming floors, upgrade of the F&B, substantial upgrade in regard to the F&B facilities, expansion of a car park on the southern end of the building. There was the demolition of the dome and the acquisition of the land associated with the dome, and respective car parking in that regard. There was the upgrade of the administrative offices at the facility.
Thank you. Now, your statement outlines what appears to be very considerable experience that you have in construction and property development. Can I just ask you to give examples of some of the major property developments that you've been involved in, and particularly any that you consider comparable to the Crown Towers project?
Yes, I've been involved in significant amount of, for example, convention centres. We developed the convention centre here in Perth, associated car parking. F&B, we did the entire retail development in Walsh Bay, in Sydney, Bennelong, along the Bennelong area. Numerous hotels, probably too many from the Hyatt Hotel in Perth I mean, there'd be numerous hotels throughout Australia. In regard to other facilities, I mean, I could, if you would like me to specifically answer.
That's enough, thank you. Now, I want to get back to the Crown projects, and I'll take you through a few documents just to assist your own recollection and to also give some assistance to the commissioners. Can the operator please bring up document CRW.702.001.8246? This should have been a document provided by Alan, so Crown Solicitors. It's CRW.702.001.8246. Okay, Mr. Roberts, I'll just take you through some of the key aspects of the information in the document. What I'm looking at is a development update to the Burswood board. and it's dated 9 August 2012. What this document shows, and I'll just pause there, do you recall receiving the development updates while you were doing
Yes, I do, yes.
This particular update identifies various aspects of development to the Crown Complex. For example, there's an expansion to the main gaming floor, which is identified as a $110 million expansion. Do you recall those works?
Yes,
Then, and I think you've already mentioned this, there is reference to a rebranding of the Crown Metropole and the Crown Promenade, and that's identified as a $7 million expenditure for the rebranding. And then the actual refurbishment itself is $58.7 million. Does that accord with your recollection?
it does.
And then one of the other major aspects of this particular development is a reference to what's described as the third hotel. Now, should I take that to be a reference to the Crown Towers development?
Correct.
Now, it's identified in this update that the expected expenditure, or the budget, or target budget, is $550 million. Does that accord with your recollection?
It does.
And it also explains that the WA government had approved Burswood's request to purchase 5.8 hectares of land to support the development of that third hotel. Does that accord with your recollection?
It does.
And that the budget that I mentioned of $550 million was part of a 5-year plan with respect to that development. Does that accord with your recollection?
It does.
Thank you. Now, I have another document. See if that one's on the system. It's CRW.702.002.4705. I do apologise, Commissioners. I'll just take Mr Roberts through the key aspects of the documents. Mr Roberts, this is a similar development update. This one's in a PowerPoint form and it's dated 13 August 2013. I just want to take you through some of the key elements, or what's described as the development principles in relation to the Crown Towers development. First of all, it was proposed as a 6-star hotel in Perth. Does that accord with your recollection?
Yes, it does.
Certain features are described as, in relation to the development, to position Crown Perth as an international quality resort and for strategic long-term investment in WA tourism. Now, do you recall discussions at the time in relation to those principles, and can you explain to the Commissioners what the thinking was behind those particular aspects of the development?
Yes, I recall that the vision of the shareholders being Crown was that they wanted to provide an integrated resort to Perth. That it wasn't all about gambling. It was very much to provide something that Perth didn't have in regard to an experience.
And there was also discussion of a strategic long-term investment in WA tourism.
That's correct.
Can you recall what the discussions and specific thinking was in relation to developing tourism?
Not the specific discussions, but along the lines of that they wanted to provide 3 tiers of tourism experience in terms of a hotel experience, and then obviously the facilities such as entertainment, F&B, etc.
Thank you. One of the other features listed here is to develop a portal to the stadium precinct development. Now, can I take it that's a reference to the Perth Stadium?
Yes.
And can you just explain a little in relation to what the intention was behind that particular principle?
That was my recollection at that point in time was to expand a retail link and other facilities between the two, the Optus Stadium as it is today and the Crown facility or Crown Crown Perth.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Can I bring up a document, and this should be in the hearing bundle, CRW.703.001.1277. Thank you. So you'll see on the screen, Mr. Roberts, this is the board pack for Burswood Limited for a meeting that was to be held on 16 February 2017. You'll see that you're listed as one of the attendees. Now, you would have received this board pack, I assume?
I assume correct.
Thank you. And you'll see that item 4 of the agenda is development update.
You may have to scroll down. I can't see it. Thank you. Yes, I do.
Thank you. And that was a running agenda item, wasn't it?
That was my recollection.
Now, can we scroll through to page .1358, please?
As soon as possible.
And so this is the cover page to the development agenda. If we just move over to the next page, and if we could just slowly scroll through, please, to page 1363. And as those pages are scrolling through, these are many of the different developments, some of which you had mentioned earlier, aren't they, Mr. Roberts?
They are.
Thank you. And at page 1363, you'll see, in fact, the discussion in relation to Crown Towers. Now, bearing in mind, and you'll see the date up there, this is 16 February 2017, so some 5 years on after the first update that I took you to. According to this document, the construction had completed and the hotel was open to the public as scheduled on the 1st of December 2016, and that the total final budgeted cost was 645 million. Does that accord with your recollection?
It does.
Thank you. And now, going back to the time that this development was undertaken, essentially the 5 years to December 2016, and having regard to your experience and expertise in relation to property development, how do you rate the standard of the Crown Towers development compared to other hotels and resorts in Western Australia?
In my opinion, it would be one of the, if not the best hotel facility. Certainly it was at that point in time. I would say now there are others that are of equal standard.
Thank you. And again, having regard to, as I said, the time the development was undertaken, how would you rate Crown Towers compared to other hotels and resorts in Australia?
Again, I would say that it would it'd be at the very top echelon of hotels available.
Thank you. And if you're able to say so, what impact, in your view, did the Crown Towers development have on the Perth casino complex and the surrounding areas?
I think it had a profound impact in regard to, positive impact, in regard to what was quite a dilapidated property prior to the development, and on completion of the development, it was really quite a world-class facility.
And did you make any observations about the effect, if any, on the local economy and tourism?
Yes, of course. During the times that the development was undertaken, Perth was it wasn't in the same financial position it was today, and it was certainly, my recollection, one of the largest capital Certainly in the CBD, I believe it was the largest capital development undertaking at that point in time.
Thank you. Now, I've just got some questions in relation to corporate social responsibility. Can I please have document, and this is an exhibit, PUB.00013.0001.1401 brought up, please? So you'll see, Mr. Roberts, it's the annual report for 2018, which was likely the last report issued before you left the company. Can we scroll through, please, to page 1421? So you'll see the heading there, Mr. Roberts, Corporate Social Responsibilities, and as we just slowly please scroll through to page 1424, you'll see, just slowly please, you'll see various references to initiatives by Crown, I'll describe them, which concern supporting employees and the broader community, including diversity and inclusion programs and the support of charities, including the $200 million Crown Resorts Foundation. Now, are you familiar with those various programs and Crown's work in those areas?
From what I see here, I am.
Thank you. And going back to your time as a director, in your capacity as a member of the board, did you have a genuine desire to see Crown support its employees and the communities in those ways?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Garris. Is there any other applications for leave to from anyone who may be outside this room? No. Commissioner Jenkins.
Quite a few questions, thank you. In relation to harm minimisation and responsible gaming, can I ask you, indeed, in relation to 2018, did you review the sixth review of the casino operator and licence prepared by the Victorian Commission for Gambling and Liquor Regulation and published in June 2018?
No.
Now, that's a document that's prepared in relation to Crown Melbourne. Do you recall being aware whilst you were on the board that those reviews were done at regular intervals in relation to Crown Melbourne?
I can't recall, sorry.
So you're saying you didn't know they were done?
I simply can't recall if I was told or not.
So you don't recall the contents of that review being brought to your attention?
No, I don't.
So you don't recall being told in relation to that review done by the Victorian Casino Regulator that one of the significant matters shown by the investigation have included failures of governance and risk management contributing to compliance slippages?
No, I don't.
So you don't remember management bringing this to your attention and indicating what relevance that might have to Perth casino operations?
No, I don't.
So you don't recall also that it found that there was a lack of innovation and progress regarding Crown's approach to responsible gambling?
No, I don't.
You don't think it might have been relevant for these matters to have been brought to your attention on the basis that if there were issues at Crown Melbourne, there might also be issues in the Perth casino?
In hindsight, again, I'm not sure of the relevant content. I would say it was probably appropriate that the executives bring that to our attention.
And where the regulator then goes on to require Crown Melbourne to, for example, implement significant changes in relation to their socially responsible gaming program. You're saying you were unaware in 2018 of those recommendations being made in respect of Crown Melbourne?
Correct. I was unaware.
Do you think it would have been relevant for you to be told about that? Because if they were recommendations made in respect of Crown Melbourne, they might also be relevant for Burswood Limited's board to know.
In hindsight, I would have liked them brought to my attention, although I can't recall if they were or they weren't.
In relation to the China arrests, do you recall that prior to the China arrests, in the arrests of Crown employees in 2016, for at least a year before that, there were issues in relation to the promotion of overseas gambling tours in China?
I can't recall.
So you don't recall, again, the management of Perth Casino bringing to your attention, for example, that promoters of Korean casinos who were promoting Korean casinos in China had been arrested about a year before Crown employees were arrested?
I can't recall.
You don't recall management informing the board that China was, over a 12-month period at least, if not longer, before the China arrests, cracking down on the promotion of overseas casino gaming tours in China?
I cannot recall.
I think if that was the case and the board wasn't told about it, that is a failure in management reporting to the board.
I would have liked to understand the content, those issues, yes.
Then, in respect to the issues which this commission has to consider, as I understand your position is you say that whilst you were a member of the Burswood Limited board, you considered that you were conducting yourself appropriately according to your obligations as a director.
Correct.
Is that right? And you believed that at the time that you were a director, you were receiving appropriate reports from management
Correct.
about risks at the Perth Casino?
Correct.
And that what you were being told, both by management and by external consultants, was that there were no red flags in relation to risks at the Perth Casino.
That is correct.
Now, you received a summons in order to give evidence before this commission, did you not?
I did.
And part of that summons included a copy of our commission.
Yes.
And did you read that document?
I have to refresh myself, sorry.
I'm referring in particular to paragraph 4 of it, where it actually refers to the Bergen inquiry findings. That
would you mind if I had
they can probably be brought up, but I can read them to you. It says, the Bergen inquiry also found, amongst other things, that Crown Resorts Limited, A, facilitated money laundering through the accounts of Southbank Investments Pty Ltd and Riverbank Investments Pty Ltd, unchecked and unchanged in the face of warnings from its bankers. B, disregarded the welfare of its China-based staff, putting them at risk of detention by pursuing an aggressive sales policy and failing to escalate risks through the appropriate corporate risk management structures. And C, entered into and/or continued commercial relationships with junket operators who had links to triads and other organised crime groups.
Yes.
Now, do you recall reading that?
I recall being familiar with it, yes.
And given that you say you didn't read the Bergen report, and it doesn't seem as if you sort of took a lot of notice of what was in the media about these things, by the time you got this summons and read that, did that alarm you, Mr. Roberts, that those things that happened on your watch, well, certainly that an inquiry had found that those things had happened on your watch at Perth Casino?
To the qualification, can I qualify that in terms of when I read about the answer is yes in short. However, when I read this, that I was, and I still to this day not, other than what I've heard through the press and the like about Riverbank investment. So I am very surprised, yes.
Well, so were you not only surprised, but did it concern you as someone who you regarded as complying with your duties as director and receiving appropriate information from management, that these things occurred on your watch, so to speak?
The answer is yes.
And so did you make any inquiries and then decide, well, I better read the Bergen report?
No.
Did you speak to any of the management of Perth Casino, like Mr. Felsted, ring him up and say, why didn't you tell me about this?
No.
Is there any reason why not?
Because I sought legal advice in this, and I was told not to. Suggested I took the advice of my legal advisors.
Do you accept that these things occurred at Perth Casino whilst you were a director of Burswood Limited?
Well, I object to that question in the reference to these things. He hasn't read the Bergen report, and we know that those who have read it include matters which extend beyond his term. So there is a bit of an ambiguity about the question. I don't have any objection to the area, but he hasn't read it. So these things, if that's a reference to those matters, if that could be brought to his attention, in other words, the matters on the screen.
I just want to understand, Mr. Roberts, what your position is about these matters.
Understood.
In respect of A, is your position is that you accept it did occur, or that you can't help the Commission in determining whether it did or didn't occur?
I think firstly, if the inquiry has found that it did occur, then I accept it did occur. And secondly, I don't believe I can help the Commission in regard to in respect of A.
Can you tell me when you first heard about Riverbank Investments Pty Ltd?
Yes. In the media, I can't tell you specifically the date, but it was within the last 6 months or so.
Do you recall Burswood Limited, a board packet from Burswood Limited, you being told, and I don't assume that it was actually whilst you were on the board, because it might have been afterwards, So I'm not putting to you it was whilst you're on the board, but do you recall it being included in a board pack that the Riverbank account was being closed?
No.
So then going on to B, do you accept that that occurred whilst you're on the board of Burswood Limited?
Again, if the Bergen inquiry found so, then I would have to accept those findings.
But on the basis of, I understand, and you tell me if I'm wrong, on the basis of your evidence today and in your statement, you had no knowledge of that whilst you were on the board of Burswood Limited.
No knowledge in respect of the disregard of the welfare of its child, no.
And in fact, according to you, Mr. Felsted assured you that there was no basis to that
Correct.
for their arrest.
Correct.
And in relation to C, do you accept that that occurred whilst you're on that conduct occurred whilst you're on the board of Burswood Limited?
Again, if the Bergen inquiry has found so, then I accept that.
But your position would be that you had no knowledge of that whilst you were on the board of Burswood Limited.
That is correct.
So if also this commission was to conclude that those things occurred, your position is that you cannot help us really to determine how they occurred because you didn't know they were occurring.
Correct.
Management didn't tell you or give you any hint or idea they were occurring.
Correct.
The reports that you were receiving from management didn't raise any red flags about these issues.
Correct.
And you regarded the Burswood entities basically as being well run by management
Correct.
and appropriately governed by the Burswood Limited board.
Correct.
Now, if these things were occurring, and in particular I would have to be in relation to A, money laundering through the Riverbank Investments account specifically, because that relates to Perth Casino, and C, junket operations with links to triads or other organised crime groups. If those things were occurring in relation to Perth casino operations, would you agree with me that someone in management should have known about it?
Yes.
And if they had known about it, they should have told the board about it.
Yes.
And in your view, so say looking at the River A, we're talking about conduct that might have been occurring from around 2007, from when you were approximately on the board, to 2015.
Yes.
In that period, who in management do you think should have advised the board about these things if they had known about them?
The CEO, Mr. Barry Felsted, the compliance officer, Mr. Josh Preston, and really anyone who knew about it.
That's all that I wanted to ask you about that document. And there was actually only one other issue I wanted to ask you about, and that was the nature of your appointment as a director. Did you regard yourself as an independent director or nominated by a shareholder?
No, independent.
Right. And so did you disclose to the board of Burswood Limited in any formal manner your friendship with Mr. Packer?
I can't recall me disclosing per se, but I can say that the other independent director was aware of my friendship with Mr. Packer, and so was the other members of the board.
Mr. Roberts, you know more about running boards than I do, so tell me, in the situation you were in as an independent director with a friendship with the, I'll say main shareholder of the parent, well, of the company, should an independent director in that situation make a formal disclosure of that potential conflict of interest or not?
Well, firstly, it's the shareholder that appoints the director. So therefore, I'm not sure that I understand your question.
I suppose the point is that if you have that friendship, are you capable of, there might be an issue as to whether you're capable of acting independently.
No, absolutely not. There's not, I don't see that as an issue.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Mr. Roberts, I lost my notes. Mr. Roberts, I want to ask you about the structure of
Yes.
what you've termed the Burswood Group. But can I preface it by saying that I understand from your witness statement that one of the things that you looked at when you were first appointed was the state agreement.
Correct.
Did you also look at the property trust deed?
I can't recall, Commissioner.
Did you appreciate from the terms of your reading of the state agreement that there were separate roles and obligations of particular companies, namely the trustee, which we now know to, of course, to be Burswood Nominees Limited, and the manager, which appears to be Casino Resort Management Limited, that within the state agreement contemplated different roles and responsibilities for those companies?
That's my recollection.
So against that background, I'm coming to this question of governance of the three companies within the group: Burswood Nominees Limited, Burswood Limited, and Burswood Resort Management Limited. And I think you said that there was no demarcation between them or pigeonholing between those three companies. And perhaps the most succinct way of expressing what I understand to be your approach is to go back to what you said in the answer to question 15 in your statement, which, to paraphrase, says that the executive team reported to Burswood Limited with respect to all aspects of the Burswood Group, and it was Burswood Limited that made the primary decisions for the group. Is that a fair summation?
Yes.
Okay. Now, can I ask you this? For an outsider who's wanting to understand the governance structure and the operational aspects of governance within a group of companies, would you agree that a primary source of information to gain an understanding would be the board packs and the board minutes?
Of those subsidiaries?
Yes, of those companies. Would be a primary source of information?
Not in my eyes necessarily so. And in the circumstance of Burswood Limited, was that, as you rightly pointed out, that the executive sat of both management and nominees on the Burswood Limited board, and provided. So I had a very, very thorough briefing from the CEO who sat across those boards. I had very detailed board packs in respect of, voluminous board packs in regards to the operations. They were further supported by internal audited reports, further by a legal and compliance report, and thirdly, an audited report. So my view is that I was provided substantial amount of information on the operations of the casino.
I'm sorry, I think you may have misunderstood my
Sorry.
question. My question is, well, it's me,
Yes.
an outsider trying to gain an understanding of the governance structure and the practical implementation of the governance structure of this group of companies. Would you accept that a primary source of information to which you would go to gain an understanding of the governance structure would be the board packs and the board minutes?
Yes, to the qualification of those fellow directors, being the executive director sat next to me, and may I also say this structure was inherited, as you know, and therefore I felt that there was ample information provided to me.
Yeah, my questions here are not as to whether it was good, bad or indifferent. I'm trying to get an understanding of it. So what I'm going to ask you is that if in a situation where you've got three companies and you look at the board packs and the board minutes and you see that in one company the board met reasonably regularly, the board packs were reasonably extensive and there were minutes, and then you look at the other two companies and you see the board met infrequently, the board packs are thin and the minutes are formulaic. If you take that situation, what I'm putting to you is that if you assume that is an accurate or a reasonable summation of the board packs and board minutes of Burswood Nominees and Burswood Resort Management on the one hand, and Burswood Limited on the other hand, Burswood Limited being more extensive and the other two being less.
Yes.
That in a way supports your approach that really, in terms of this group, governance was done at the Burswood Limited level.
Correct.
All right. You used several times the word oversight in relation to what Burswood Limited was doing.
Yes.
In relation to the Crown Perth, the Burswood entities. Can you explain to me what your understanding of that term oversight, and in particular, I'm wondering where that fits with another word that you could use, which is responsibility, and whether you see the two terms as interchangeable or as different.
Firstly, the oversight was that we were ensuring that the company, certainly I as a director of Burswood Limited, that compliance and the general affairs of the business was being undertaken appropriately. So, and obviously that goes hand in glove with responsibly.
All right, thank you. Now, I want to come to the Burswood Group as Western Australian companies.
Yes.
and I want to put this proposition to you, you can either agree with it or not, that the holding of this casino licence creates special obligations of the licensee and its associated entities, special obligations to the state and the people of Western Australia. Would you agree with that?
I do.
And from your broad experience of commerce and business, would you agree with the proposition that that makes the operations of this group of companies slightly different to other commercial operations with which you might be familiar or with which we are all familiar? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Then can I ask you this? Sitting there now as you are and reflecting back on your experience over a long period as a director of this inherited structure, do you have a view as to whether this structure is fit for purpose? The purpose being to ensure that this group of companies is able to carry out the special obligations that it has to the state and the people of Western Australia?
I would say that the structure doesn't necessarily mean that it can't undertake its function and duties. Could there be a better structure? Yes, there could be. But is the structure a failure? I would say not.
And an associated allied comment or question. One particular aspect of this structure is that there has always been, a majority of management or executive directors over independent directors. Do you have a view as to whether that's appropriate given the special nature of the casino licensee and its associated entities?
I think in hindsight, having more independent directors would be more prudent.
And a similar question, you would be, I think, familiar with a situation in commercial entities where you have an audit committee. The audit committee is generally populated by directors who are independent of management. Are you familiar with that structure?
Yeah. Yes.
So far as Burswood Limited and the three-member Burswood Group is concerned, would you agree that that's not the case with an audit committee, whatever it might have been, and of whichever company it was in this structure?
That it didn't have independent people undertaking the analysis of that risk review?
But perhaps I should go back and just clarify something. This group called the ERCC, was there a separate Perth audit committee?
I can't recall.
Right. Well,
As my understanding, the ERCC undertook the review of Perth and its function as the greater group of companies of Crown.
so do I take it then that on your understanding, the ERCC was acting both as an audit and risk committee and as a legal compliance committee?
No,
Is that the same group?
I remember the ERC undertaking their function as a risk and compliance committee, and legal was separate.
Sorry?
There was a legal review, separate legal review.
Separate to the ERCC?
Yes, that was my recollection.
But did the ERCC, so far as you understood it, carry out the functions that you would expect of an audit and risk committee in another commercial enterprise?
Yes,
It did. So it would be then accurate to say that in that respect, there were no independent directors. In fact, I won't say that. There would be no independent directors on the committee which was carrying out functions which were similar to an audit and risk committee.
correct.
All right, I think that's all. Is there anything arising, Mr. Futrell?
Yes, Commissioner, this is a very minor point. I just want to clarify something for the purpose of the transcript. Mr. Roberts, you have mentioned, I think, a number of times, used the expression F and B to describe something. Is that food and beverage?
It is food and
Thank
beverage.
you.
Thanks.
Mr. Penglis?
May it please the Commission, just one area if I may. Mr. Roberts, Mr. Futrell brought to your attention that in the year before your resignation, you didn't attend board meetings in person. You agreed with that?
Correct.
You resigned in your witness statement, you indicate the 5th of June 2019.
That is
Can you tell
correct.
the Commission why you resigned?
Yes, I reside in New Zealand, and with other obligations that I had, I felt that my time and tenure on the board was up, and I had discussed this with the CEO and Mr. Barry Felsted and Mr. John Poynton for quite some time before that. I expressed that I was looking to resign at a given point in time, but I wanted to give the board ample notice in regard to that. And it was really that I was living overseas and had less of a direct connection with
May
Western
it please the
Australia.
Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Penglis. Now, the practice that we've been adopting about the preparation of a tender list, I think we'll carry on here, will it not, Mr.
Yes,
Futrell?
it will. Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, just before we rise, I'd like to make a statement that some media outlets have made inquiries about the declaration that I made on Monday of a personal association with the chairman of Seven West Media Limited. Now, that statement was made in a particular context, namely the calling of a witness who was responsible to the board of that company. I think that is enough for that purpose. However, I will add that as part of that personal association, I am a director of company associated with the family interests of the chairman. I am satisfied that neither that nor any other aspect of my personal association with the chairman conflicts with my obligations to or in this Royal Commission. Thank you. We will now adjourn. I'm sorry, Mr. Roberts, there may be some tidying up to do, so it's probably more convenient to leave the summons in place, but you are free to go.
Thank you,
And
Commissioner.
we'll now adjourn until 10 a.m. on Monday.
All rise.